The night carried a vibration that felt older than memory, an uneasy hum drifting across the abandoned fields, like the earth was whispering warnings through its own bones. The air tasted metallic, thick with the scent of a storm that hadn't yet arrived but was already shaping itself somewhere beyond the ridge. Moonlight cut across the landscape in cold, broken fragments, spilling over the empty road, the rusted fences, the quiet land that once held a history nobody wanted to remember. This was the kind of night when buried stories pressed against the soil, trying to claw their way back into the world. The land stretched out like a forgotten scar, its contours marked by the echoes of generations who tilled its stubborn earth, fought its seasons, and carved their survival into its dust. But now, only shadows remained, long, stretched, trembling at the edges of moonlit silence. Somewhere in the distance, a lone animal rustled through the brush, uneasy, sensing something shifting beneath the surface. A slow, rhythmic humming rose from the ground. Not mechanical, not natural. Something in between. A pulse. A warning. A presence. The wind carried remnants of the past, fragments of a place that used to belong to a family whose stories had been swallowed by time and stolen by the hands of people who considered themselves untouchable. A tension lingered over the land, heavy, suffocating, shaped by an injustice that had taken root long before the first stone was laid for the homes that should never have existed. Under the moon's pale gaze, the hilltop waited, silent, still, bearing the shape of a truth long erased by those who believed they could decide who mattered and who didn't. On the other side of the valley, the rows of newly built homes stood in fragile confidence, their fresh paint gleaming like a lie dressed in white. The ground beneath them held a bitterness that had been ignored, a resentment carved from years of entitlement, exclusion, and quiet cruelty. The structures looked peaceful, almost innocent, unaware of the weight of the land beneath them, land taken through forged papers, whispered agreements, and decisions made behind closed doors by people who believed that power excused theft. A restless energy swirled in the air, as if the land itself remembered every footprint that had been erased, every boundary that had been shifted, every life pushed aside. The hum grew deeper, vibrating through the soil, pulsing with a sense of inevitability. The valley felt like a lung slowly filling, swelling with a truth too heavy to contain. Somewhere in the darkness, an old mechanism stirred, a relic built long before the world learned how easily justice could be rewritten. Its gears trembled, its ancient stone walls quivered, awakened by the movement of a hand that knew exactly what had been taken and what was about to be returned. The first tremor rolled across the ground, subtle yet decisive, like the heartbeat of something vast awakening from a long, furious sleep. In that moment, nature held its breath. The land exhaled. And the story began. Hit subscribe. Watch till the end. The land had always carried two histories, one visible, one buried. The visible one was polished, sanitized, rewritten by those who had the power to stand in front of cameras and call themselves builders of inclusive communities. But the buried one, the one carved into the soil by hands that once worked it without rest or recognition, was different. It held the truth, a story of a family who survived not because they were welcomed, but because they refused to be erased. Long before the homes appeared, long before the HOA formed itself into a machine of smiling cruelty, this valley belonged to a family whose skin tone alone had marked them as outsiders in a world that claimed equality but practiced exclusion. Generations ago, they arrived with nothing but determination and a quiet belief that land, if cared for, could protect a person in ways society never would. They faced stares, whispers, roadblocks, and the subtle violence that never called itself violence, yet cut deeper than any blade. They endured because endurance was the only option the world had left them. They worked the soil until their fingerprints were etched into its layers. The land gave struggles, but it also gave life. Every harvest, every patch of green sprouting through stubborn dirt, became a small declaration of defiance in a place that often pretended not to see them. Over time, the farm grew. The valley flourished. The family's roots sank deep, creating a bond with the land that outsiders would never understand. But history has a habit of circling back with teeth. When the next generation inherited the land, the world around them had changed shapes but not intentions. Racism learned to wear cleaner clothes, speak softer, operate through paperwork instead of fists. It hid itself in zoning laws, property lines, and county meetings where certain people never received invitations. It whispered through bureaucratic decisions that looked neutral on paper but struck with precision in practice. The family understood this quiet discrimination too well. They knew that land ownership was often the only barrier between survival and erasure. So they protected it, every acre, every boundary marker, every document preserved with meticulous care. They kept maps, deeds, surveys, and even letters written in fading ink, knowing that one day, someone might try to take what they had fought so hard to keep. But time is a relentless eraser. When the elder of the family, the one who remembered every storm, every drought, every injustice, passed away, the valley began to lose its guardian. His absence created a silence the land had never known. The fields grew wild. The fences loosened. The earth seemed to sag, tired from carrying a history of endurance without rest. The world outside the valley changed faster than the land could adjust. Developers arrived with crisp suits and polished boots, walking across the soil as though stepping on someone else's story meant nothing. They carried blueprints and promises, not memories. They spoke of community growth and revitalization, but their eyes never rested on the gravestones at the base of the hill, nor the old stones marking the original property lines. They saw empty land, not living legacy. And racism, disguised as opportunity, saw an opening. The developers approached the county with claims that the land was underutilized. They argued it had no active owner, no productive purpose. They conveniently ignored the small farmhouse still standing at the southern edge, weathered but filled with proof of ownership. They dismissed family records as outdated. They ignored boundaries clearly etched on official maps. Their confidence didn't come from truth. It came from the comfort of knowing that those with darker skin rarely had the resources to fight back. The HOAs involved in the development were no different. They presented themselves as protectors of neighborhood standards, but beneath their polished newsletters and cheerful landscaping rules lay an unspoken hierarchy. They built communities with invisible walls. Curated environments where diversity was a selling point only when it was decorative and harmless. To them, the family's land wasn't a legacy, it was an obstacle. And obstacles were meant to be cleared. Construction crews arrived without warning. Heavy machines rolled over the fields, flattening grass that once fed livestock, crushing soil that had carried generations. Workers pounded stakes into the ground where the family had once planted trees after every birth and every passing. Concrete covered the places where the old farmers had once prayed for rain or shelter or simply strength to continue. The land felt every intrusion like a bruise. The machines dug trenches where the valley's natural drainage once flowed. They filled old irrigation channels with gravel, cutting off the water patterns carefully shaped by decades of knowledge. They buried the subtle geography that had protected the valley from flooding, sealing it under foundations designed by people who never asked why the land was shaped the way it was. And at the center of this upheaval stood the new Homeowners Association, an organization born from entitlement and decorated with smiles. They saw themselves as pioneers of improvement, completely unaware that their improvements trampled a history they never bothered to learn. The first homes rose with disturbing speed. Workers hammered away while the valley groaned beneath them. The land's original markers, stones placed by ancestors to preserve ownership, were tossed aside like debris. Even the trees planted by previous generations were cut down, their stumps painted with fluorescent spray to mark where luxury driveways would sit. Some residents wondered aloud why the valley dipped so strangely in the middle, why the soil felt damp after light rain, why the ground seemed to sink in certain areas. Their concerns were politely dismissed by the HOA, which believed confidence was stronger than nature and arrogance more durable than truth. Meanwhile, the farmhouse at the valley's edge, still full of old documents, photographs, maps, and proof of rightful ownership, stood untouched but endangered. The new community treated it like an eyesore, an unwanted reminder that their world had existed long before theirs. The racism wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was quiet, procedural, and deeply intentional. County offices lost certain records. The HOA misinterpreted the boundaries. Surveyors mysteriously corrected the lines to favor development. Developers insisted the land was vacant, despite evidence to the contrary. Every step had the same purpose: erase the family, rewrite the land, claim the valley. The soil felt the injustice long before the family could respond. The hum beneath the earth, faint at first, nearly imperceptible, slowly began to grow, as though something beneath the valley remembered what was being done and refused to stay silent. Because buried deep under the hill, older than most would believe, was the structure the ancestors had built for protection. A private dam, small, discreet, forgotten by all but the land itself. It had been constructed during years when racism wasn't subtle and survival depended on creating one's own safety. The dam collected runoff, controlled floods, and maintained the valley's natural balance. It had slept for decades, but it had never died. By the time the family realized what had happened, when they returned and saw the rows of houses standing where their legacy once breathed, the damage had already begun. The anger wasn't immediate. It was slow, heavy, rooted in the knowledge that this wasn't the first time something had been taken, and history had once again repeated itself under the guise of progress. The valley waited. The hum deepened. The storm gathered behind distant clouds. And nature, patient but never forgetful, prepared to reclaim what had been stolen. The setup for everything that followed, every tremor, every surge, every collapse, was already in motion. Because the land had memory. The land had limits. And when pushed too far, the land answered. The valley carried its anger like a buried storm, gathering strength beneath the polished surfaces of the new neighborhood. Each day, the soil sagged a little deeper under the weight of homes that did not belong, the ground remembering every boundary crossed, every document forged, every ancestor dismissed as insignificant. The discrimination that had once been whispered in county offices now echoed through cracked foundations and restless earth. The homeowners walked on smooth pavements without sensing the tension beneath their feet. Lawns wilted faster than sprinklers could revive them. The air thickened with humidity that did not match the weather. At night, the hum from the buried dam grew louder, vibrating through pipes and walls like a warning no one wanted to hear. Nature had begun shifting in patterns the developers never studied, reclaiming pathways that had existed long before surveys and blueprints pretended to overwrite them. The valley's basin, once a living artery of water, strained beneath the concrete blocking its course. Pressure built in silence, compressing decades of knowledge ignored by those who believed their authority outweighed the land's memory. The imbalance deepened until the earth could no longer hold its breath, poised on the edge of a reckoning shaped by injustice and sealed by arrogance. The breaking point arrived in silence, not thunder. The valley shifted with a deep internal groan, a sound born from years of pressure and the weight of stolen history. Beneath the hill, the old dam awakened fully, releasing its pent-up force in a surge that moved with deliberate purpose. Water spilled through the hidden channels carved by ancestors who understood the land far better than the ones who replaced them. The first swell pushed against the weakened earth, cracking through the concrete that smothered the valley's natural arteries. Driveways buckled. Manicured lawns curled upward as the soil beneath them dissolved into restless mud. The foundations of the first row of houses trembled, sinking as the ground reclaimed the space taken from it. The pressure surged again, stronger, unstoppable, forcing the water to rise through every artificial barrier. The valley responded like a living entity reclaiming breath after long suffocation. Walls split. Streets warped. Entire structures tilted in slow, helpless surrender as the land reversed the theft committed against it. Nature did not rage, it corrected. The earth did not destroy, it restored. The valley, long ignored, finally spoke with the full force of everything it had endured. When the last tremor faded, the valley settled into a heavy, breathless calm. Water pooled in the reclaimed basin, filling the space where stolen foundations once stood. The land absorbed the silence like a long-delayed exhale, its contours restored to the shape it had known for generations. No shouts, no alarms, only the quiet correction of a truth that could not be buried forever. The homes stood broken, leaning in defeat, their bright paint dulled by mud and memory. The polished dream built on forged papers and quiet prejudice dissolved into debris scattered across ground that refused to forget. Inspectors, officials, and residents soon traced the ruin back to the place everyone tried to ignore. The altered land, the erased history, the discriminatory decisions woven into every step of the development. The valley did not celebrate. It simply returned to what it was meant to be. The injustice that shaped the destruction became undeniable, forcing those who looked away to finally see what the land had carried for so long. And as the water settled into stillness, the message lingered, soft, heavy, unforgettable. What is taken through injustice eventually returns to the earth that remembers everything.